We're getting ready to celebrate the grand opening of Longfellow Park. This project really illustrates what can happen when you collaborate. We've got AARP, CPAC, BREC, the city, DPW, all at the table trying to make this whole entire area a better place.
Hi, everyone. We have an hour to talk about the Miami area and what their experience there, how that relates to Louisiana. So I want to get us started right away. We already have heard from Joe about Miami and his work today. Do we need to a quick introduction again? Joe is recognized nationally as an innovator in urban design and graphic communication, and he works at Kohl & Partner, and has done some remarkable work in Miami, but also across the country, and including here in Louisiana, with CPACs actually, several years ago. And the master plan, okay, that's great. We've also have heard from Gretchen today already. She's the CEO of Catalyst Miami, a nonprofit serving the Miami-Dade County, and she's also the chair of the South Florida Community Development Coalition. And we have Joyce, who we had the pleasure of working in a workshop with yesterday. She's the founder and president of Climate Resilience Consulting, a certified B Corporation based in Chicago. She has over 25 years of experience creating and implementing resilience and sustainability strategies, management systems, performance measurements, partnerships, benchmarking, and reporting. And she recently chaired the recent Urban Lands Institute advisory focus on Miami Beach's climate adaptation and stormwater management plans. And we also have Lynette Cardoch, who is with Moffatt and Nichol, and thank you for Moffatt and Nichol for sponsoring this session. Lynette leads the Global Resilience Services as the Director of Resilience and Adaptation. She's a coastal ecologist with over 20 years of experience in regulatory and water policies, coastal restoration, and urban and coastal resiliency. She routinely leads a team of an interdisciplinary team of engineers, scientists, and regulators, and led the strategic development and tactical implementation of a global climate program and multi-sector coastal resilience service. It's very impressive. Thank you for being here. I wanted to start with a short analysis of our title, which is Frontline, a look to Miami. And when I looked up Frontline, it said, among another definition, that it's the most advanced, responsible, and visible position in a field or activity. And I thought that was an interesting segue, actually, into our discussion about what is happening in Miami and how what is done there, because they also deal with climate change impacts, and how that might relate to Louisiana, what we can learn from that experience. So with that, I would like to ask Joe, Gretchen. Oh, we need the clicker.
Oh,
right?
No, I can do it.
Oh, you wouldn't go up?
Last
Okay.
time we were going up here.
Okay, let's do that. About their work in Miami, focusing on what we can learn in Louisiana.
Hello, everybody. Great to be here. And I hope you all are getting a lot out of this conference because it's amazing. All right. So we think of sea level rise, especially on a coastal community, and think, oh, it's all kind of the same. But actually, there's a lot more complexity to it. On the coast, where the beach is and the sand dune is where the ground is the highest, especially on a barrier island. So there the issue more is storm surge during a storm event. It's already high enough, and there's nobody living on it. And then on the bay side of the barrier islands, that's where the water tends to come in during a storm, and it's the lowest lying area and the first area that's going to get wet. And already people who live on the bay side of Miami Beach, for example, at high tide will say that their yards are mushy when they go out and walk on them. And then in the middle, it's really more storm event, clearing the streets of water during a rain event, especially during high tide. This is the top two photos are Highway A1A in Fort Lauderdale after Superstorm Sandy. So that was 2012. And you can see the parking pay station is it moved, but it didn't move off its feet completely. So the sidewalk and the street was buried in the sand, and you can see the public works folks pushing the ocean back as fast as they could. And so one of the things that they did was they basically, the cross section is a little impossible for you to see, but they took the outer edge of the roadway and basically just put a steel curtain down as far as they could pound it down, I guess, to help keep the sand off. So the next storm, the road should be a little bit better protected. That's just one of the things they're doing, and I'm trying to just give you a menu of things that have happened and kind of how we're reacting. So usually on the king tide, it's common for the streets to flood. It'll be a nice sunny day sometimes, and no rain, and it turns into this, and it's starting to become a common experience for everyone, and I don't think anyone's really too happy about it. So Miami Beach has created a program. Every time I read about it, the dollar amount's different. I think it's 400 to 500 million now to raise the streets and to put pumps into place. So on one hand, it doesn't seem to make any sense that you're just taking the water out of the road and then pumping it back into the bay, letting it flow back right into the island, but I guess there's some science to it. I would love to know more about it. But I guess it's like, when you take a bucket and you pull the water out of a bathtub or something you're trying to empty, the water goes down for a little bit before it rushes back in. So I guess that's the effect. But what they're actually doing is, from an environmental standpoint, is that they're capturing a lot of the pollution, like the plastic bottles and bags and et cetera. And so they're actually extracting that during the process of pumping this out. So here's an example, one of the first places. I believe that's the city engineer, very proud of him raising the sidewalk. Well, actually, he's built two sidewalks, so that there's one that's at the level of the building, and there's another sidewalk at the level of the street. And then you can see this was obviously before they installed the railing. So on one hand, this does meet the engineering need, but from an urban design standpoint, what it's doing to the private properties on the edges, you're now taking a commercial property which is dependent upon pedestrians to walk off the sidewalk and into that building. Now you're basically creating a barrier and making that impossible. And so there's that one example with the engineer there with the tables. I can imagine that, eating at the table and the dirt from people's shoes maybe blowing over into my egg salad sandwich or whatever, I don't know. It just seems a little off to me. And so if you heard my talk earlier, this coordinated effort of how do we treat the private properties and the public properties to make a concerted effort, I think is really important. So what's been happening is that there's been a lot of pushback. The program, they've been doing this now since 2016, so we've got 2 years of public projects underway. There's some of the pumps being installed. This one, I guess in one location, one of the pumps wasn't turned on or didn't turn on, and the restaurant that was down in that little hole got flooded. The insurance company said, well, the floor is below the level of the ground, so it's a basement, and your coverage isn't applicable here. That got turned around after the owner went crazy, and so the claim was paid, but nonetheless, it's just another example of what happens when the public infrastructure is not taking into account this interconnection between the private properties and the public properties. We also have historic buildings, and so there's, if you're going to end up raising buildings at some point, Is it worth actually raising these buildings? Now, these buildings are really well loved, and it would be a shame, I think, architecturally to lose them. I just posed the question, is it maybe worth just rebuilding them like they were, but up higher? The interiors of these buildings are in pretty bad shape, and in fact aren't really designed for how we might live today. They're small closets, mostly built in the 30s and 40s, small closets, small rooms. It was basically an affordable vacation spot, I believe, back in the day. But the beauty and the art of these buildings is really in the facades, and you can see that photo where they're renovating the building, they're keeping the facade. The facades are mostly concrete and stucco, concrete block and stucco. So again, I don't know how easy that is to raise. Why this becomes important is insurance. If you have a house that's above the base floor elevation set by FEMA, then your flood insurance costs, and this is not even talking about windstorm insurance and just basic general insurance, that affects the cost. So this is going to affect affordable housing because most of the older buildings is where that affordable housing is in place already. So as FEMA keeps raising this, it basically makes the property owners, who own these apartments, having to crank up the rent. And just a couple slides to show that how this works is the city comes in, they raise the street. You can do some things to the buildings like waterproof the bottom, maybe create a cistern as it gets raised later. Make the buildings adaptable. This affects the zoning codes, so you might want to change codes, be more flexible about building height, so that you can do that little extra push for the future. Because the buildings we build today will be the historic buildings of Miami Beach 100 years from now.
Good afternoon. My name is Gretchen and I'm the CEO of Catalyst Miami. We're a nonprofit organization serving Miami-Dade County. And our mission is to identify and solve issues that are adversely affecting low-wealth communities throughout Miami-Dade County. So this, as you might imagine, gets us into a lot of different policy issues, programs. Our strategy for addressing poverty and financial insecurity is very mixed. We do a lot of direct service work. We also do leadership development, coalition building, and public policy advocacy. So today I was asked to speak a little bit about the experience of climate change from the perspective of the communities where we do our work. So I'm going to start with this picture of Hurricane Irma from last September. So Irma was a very large storm, and because she was so big, it took a long time for her to pass over the state of Florida. The winds were blowing for almost an entire day, and as a result, a number of trees and power lines went down, and power was out. Not everywhere in Miami-Dade County, but in many places for anywhere from several days to 2 weeks. Now, our local economy is very dependent on tourism and service, and so what this meant for a lot of the folks that we serve is that they were not able to work. These businesses were shuttered. Some of them never reopened. And when you are living in a community where there is a very high level of what we refer to as liquid asset poverty, which means that most people do not have more than 3 months of cash on hand to address any crisis that comes up. You have people that are suddenly not able to make rent, they can't pay their electric bill, they're not able to stock their fridges with food after the storm passes. So there was significant income disruption after the storm. This is a picture of Nicholas Molino, who is a client of ours, and he owns a restaurant in Little Haiti called the Seven Seas Restaurant. And after Irma, they lost 2 of their refrigerators, so they were not able to open back up for a few weeks. He met one of the financial coaches that we have at Catalyst, and we provided a loan, a zero-interest loan, so that they could replace the refrigerators and open back up. So just to give you a sense for the kind of the pervasiveness of the financial insecurity, this is a line of people. It's about 50,000 people that lined up at a park in Miami-Dade County to pre-register for disaster SNAP. So these are disaster food stamps. The eligibility criteria for disaster SNAP is much higher than it is for regular SNAP. So these are mostly working folks that did not have enough cash on hand to restock their fridges after the storm and once the power came back on. So this is the 5th enrollment event that week, and over 50,000 people had lined up by 9 a.m. Here's a picture of some flooding after Irma, and as was mentioned earlier, this is actually not very uncommon. We often get floods like this whenever the king tide and a rainstorm happen at the same time. We call them sunny day floods. With 2 feet of sea level rise, which is expected by 2060, Miami-Dade County can expect about 12,000 flooded homes, over $6 billion in damage or lost property values, and the loss of a number of medical facilities, schools, and roads. By the end of the century, with 5 feet of sea level rise, Miami-Dade County can expect over 200,000 or about 200,000 flooded homes, over $75 billion in damage or lost property values. 285 medical facilities will no longer be able to open. 35% of our schools will be lost, 23% of roads, and 1 power plant. And as you can see from the map, the water isn't just coming from the coast. It's actually coming in from all sides. So some of the lowest lying parts of the county are pretty far inland. Just the elevation is very low, and the water table is very low. So one of the issues that is most discussed amongst the folks that we work with, both our clients and the people in our leadership programs, is that of climate gentrification, which is a phrase that I heard for the first time from one of our leadership graduates maybe about 4 years ago. So this is a picture of the elevation in the city of Miami, and the kind of brown strip of land down the center is where the railroad is. Now, most of the communities that built the railroad, they settled along the railroad. These are immigrant communities, like from the Bahamas, historically African-American communities like Liberty City, Little Haiti, Overtown. This is where the high elevation is. Most of the luxury development you're going to find along the coast. So we have a pattern that is emerging that is unusual. You would think that climate gentrification might mean when a storm wipes out an area, only the rich can afford to rebuild there. In the case of Miami-Dade County, we see intense development pressure on this high elevation land and the displacement of those families to parts of the county that are more climate vulnerable. So what are groups like Catalyst Miami doing about this? One of our strategies is to really work on training activists that come from the communities that are disproportionately experiencing the effects of climate change. We wrote a curriculum that's called Clear Miami. CLEAR stands for Climate Leadership on the Environment, Advocacy, and Resilience. We graduate 4 or 5 cohorts a year, 30 plus people in each cohort that are learning about climate science, local, state, and federal policy as it pertains to infrastructure, climate change, and all of the kind of larger economic development issues that climate influences. And these folks we're finding are significantly more engaged in local public policy after they graduate. We're also founding members of the Miami Climate Alliance, which is an 80 organization strong alliance that's achieved a number of public policy wins since its inception about 4 years ago, including demanding that the county have an Office of Resilience and having that included in the county's budget. We also were instrumental in passing the Miami Forever bond last year, so that's $400 million in bond money for affordable housing, climate resilience, and green space in the city of Miami. We have been very active in working with the University of Miami on their Miami Affordability Project, so keeping track of vacant land throughout the county and designating who owns the land, what the uses are and what the uses could be in the future. And here's a picture of one of the leadership programs that we run, and I would be happy to answer more questions about how we built the Miami Climate Alliance and what the leadership programming looks like during the conversation.
It's so interesting because we all come from such different places, but I had the great pleasure of earlier this year having a few days in Buras, Plaquemines Parish, at the invitation of Foundation for Louisiana and others involved in the LA Safe Project in a pro bono exercise. And then within weeks, I was on the plane to Miami Beach, or to Miami, then over to Miami Beach, to run this Urban Land Institute advisory panel. The city was asking us to kick the tires on their climate adaptation and stormwater management plan from a variety of perspectives. And it's just so fascinating because you and I have a totally different worldview on Miami Beach. But what I want to share with you is, I think, 3 things that I think are profoundly different about what's happening in Miami Beach than what I see happening in my limited view of what's happening in Louisiana. The first is that in Miami Beach, every elected official, including commissioners, and every one of the staff, civil servants, including appointees, own climate risk. And when you ask them about what they're doing about climate risk, they can give you at least 3 examples of what they themselves individually are doing about it. Sometimes those answers are even like, well, we're using the climate models, but I have a sensor that's looking at king tides, and that sensor has shown even greater king tide levels than the climate models would suggest. So sometimes it's very scientific. Other times it's, I'm the historic preservation guy. And these are the 3 things that I'm doing to figure out how we're going to prioritize what communities to fortify and what to essentially let go towards a more Venice-like experience, and so on. So I think that's really different from what I see here. And as Flazell so aptly reminds me, it all comes down to leadership. So I would say that that is something that I really learned very immediately in the Miami Beach case. The second thing that I think is really different is that Miami Beach is paying for their work themselves. So in 2008, they had no stormwater fee. It was all part of their water fee, as it is for most of us. But in 2008, they passed a stormwater fee. It was like 8 cents or something like that. And in 2014, they doubled that fee, and no one even blinked. That doubling of that fee gave them, in the end, over $600 million to work on infrastructure. Of course, it's not that they got $600 million from their constituents. What they did with that money was they leveraged it for more bond money, so debt from the private markets that's balanced by the revenues from these rates, these ratepayers. And I think that's also very different. Actually, there is no federal money anywhere in Miami Beach. And yet I would say they're probably, if not the leading climate adaptation city in the nation, somewhere in the top 10. And this is not with federal money, it is with their own constituents' money. Of course, they are grossly wealthy, but that is another part of the idea. They have put economic development as their key priority. So that's the third thing I will say about what I learned in Miami Beach, is that it's all about maintaining their economic development for humans. So I just came from that really gorgeous facility, the Water Institute, the Water Campus, and it's beautiful. And one thing that I was struggling with is that it's glorious and there are no people. There are like literally no people in the graphics anywhere there, except for maybe someone in a hard hat. And that's so different from Miami Beach. Of course, you know, like actually the southern part of your state, Miami Beach is all about tourism. But everything they have done has been about making sure that they get more tourists onto their set of islands. And it's very evident in all their work that that's what they're trying to do. Increase tourism income, increase property taxes, so that they can double the sewer rate and no one even, or stormwater rate, and no one even blinks. So I would just say that those are three really, I think, important lessons for those of us who don't have the wealth of Miami Beach, may not have the political will of Miami Beach, and also may not be focusing on our work from the human perspective to see whether or not we could weave some of that into our leadership in other places. And I'm happy to answer questions as we go into the next part of the session.
Well, great. I'm going to just grab the clicker. I've just got a couple slides to help set the stage of where we are in the South Florida arena. So I work for an engineering construction firm, and you know, really us as consulting engineers, when we start to think of where we fit in this, you know, landscape of resiliency, before I really launch into that, it's important for us to understand, we start to think about the sea level rise when we think of Miami and we think of South Florida. If you look at the slide on your left, that's what we typically think about. It's really that ocean barrier. And in Miami, you know, we've talked a lot about those high value properties. We're, you know, the fourth economy in the United States, fourth state, 17th in the world. Somebody mentioned Saudi Arabia. We're ahead of Saudi Arabia. And we contribute $1 trillion. So we start to look at the amount of wealth and money and where the money comes into the state of Florida. Southeast Florida does about 30% of that. So it's big money that we're talking about. The other part is that we don't often talk too much about, and actually Gretchen touched on it in her talk on the western part of the county, is that we're right up against the Everglades, or the Everglades ecosystem, so to speak. So really, when we start to look, we're a product of an extensively engineered drainage system. And we got to always remember that that's the context in which we exist. It's the science and engineering that goes behind, quite frankly, just keeping the land dry to have us there. The way it's organized is really with the water management districts, and there are 5 of them. For us in Miami-Dade, we sit in the South Florida Water Management District, and what I like about this particular slide is that we're kind of a bit of a string bean when you look at Palm Beach County, Broward County, Miami-Dade, and coming on down. There's this whole big area that is just highly managed, and it's, you know, they manage these systems, are called the primary canals, and they're the ones that really engineer how and when to move the water around. And for us, as we start to look at local and regional solutions, as scientists and engineers, we always have to keep in mind that it's in this context of this large water management system, and that all of these solutions are occurring. So as we start to think more broadly about the particular role that we play, we're kind of uniquely primed to be able to come in really early and start to talk about the adaptive solutions that we really need, and start to think more clearly about how is it and what are the challenges that we need to face in the system. So we talk about the engineering side, and I'm a scientist and I get in trouble every time I say this, but the engineering's kind of the easy part. That's not our challenge. Our challenge is really making these decisions that we need to make in light of uncertainty. So if you're a policymaker, a utility director, you know, Madam Mayor, and you're trying to look towards the future, if you're looking at sea level rise, which curve do you pick? And there are a whole lot of ways you can get to that answer, but with that level of uncertainty, and sometimes all scenarios being equally probable, it's a difficult question to ask. If you're looking at, you know, the reservoirs that you want to get built, to build or not to build, how high do you go? What are you going to do with this variability? And you don't want to be that guy that built the $1 billion reservoir only for like the rain not to come. And so there's a lot of questions, and what we're seeing is this analysis paralysis and inability, and that's one of the things I think Miami Beach has actually done really well is not wait. They're trying to be proactive and continue to make some progress as we go along. So there are probably three things that we as scientists and engineers can really help when we start to get involved early, not just when the project comes our way. And one of them is really having to do with that ability to articulate the trade-offs. And not just engineering trade-offs, and it's being early in the process so we can work with the planners, the economists, and folks to really articulate where does that decision path take you and follow those cascading impacts all the way down. It makes for a much more robust project in the end, quite frankly. The second thing is being able to look at what I like to just call these phased implementation approaches. I think we convince ourselves at times in this false narrative of like it's all or nothing, and these are the types of things we have to do, but there are a lot of ways to design really smartly so you can have almost like modular solutions, so to speak, and continue to build on them as more information comes in. And probably the third thing I'd like to say is when you take this adaptive management approach, I like to link it really, adaptive management approach, but really link it also with your asset life. It gives you this flexibility of having new information coming in. So let's go back to, sea level rise, and you have the IPCC, and they update them every 5 years. Every 5 years, you're getting a new slug of information. They're downscaled, all the things you want to do with that data. But the important part is that there are intervals in which more information is coming in, and you don't have to wait to make those decisions. You can actually go ahead and start phasing the way you want to build your project, have it be linked to your asset life too. So for example, did a lot of work at a wastewater utility, and it was on a barrier island. Well, it was really seductive at first. The folks were like, oh, we're just going to raise the whole facility. It's 143 million gallons a day, $500 million of improvements. There's no way that facility is ever going to get raised. But a lot of the things and the improvements that are being made, really, you don't have to even think about that. Your mechanical, electrical, that oxidizes, that'll 15 years they're talking about it. Out there on the island, it's 5 to 10 for some things. So there are a lot of ways that you could look at the changes that need to be made. You don't have to raise things 3 feet off the ground. You could have submarine doors. You can look at things really clearly and come up with solutions that allow you to start some of the work earlier, gain those benefits, and continue that planning process and get to the end. So I'll stop there. I'm looking forward to the dialogue. Jeannette?
Thank you. Thank you all. So it sounds like that in the Miami area, there's a strong focus on people and the places they live in and the adaptation that's being taken to that. Whereas in Louisiana, we look at our ecosystem more and more and try to figure out how we can restore certain areas of it or protect others. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, since it involves more people, what the political environment is that you're in, and how decisions are made or not made, and what challenges you have faced to or to implement the strategies that we have been talking about.
Well, maybe I could just mention one thing about that. So in Miami Beach, first of all, like much of southern Louisiana, and actually much of Louisiana, we've heard so much about the various disaster declarations, they have current climate crisis, right? They have king tides that are lapping at their doors and overtopping streets and into their business establishments. So doing work to mitigate those current risks makes political sense. But on the other hand, so we were at the end of our advisory, and we were sitting in a room like this in the commissioners' chambers with all the commissioners and then a bunch of constituents in the audience. And we said to the group at large, the future of Miami Beach is, essentially an existential question. Will it survive? And there was an audible gasp in the audience. And it's like, look at the map. I mean, yes, 67% of Plaquemines Parish has left in the last 15 years. There is no question that the existential crisis has arrived for those families that have had to leave. Not to mention those who have no way to leave and are still there. So I think that one of the political issues that I'm really struck by in the Miami Beach context, which is just for those of us who are slightly ignorant about that place, as I was, Miami Beach is a different city than Miami. It's not just a beach in Miami. In Miami Beach, they have not done a good job of bringing along their population to understand what their population's concerns are as it relates to this existential crisis. And I think that's been at really a loss of deep trust and faith in government that will probably bite them in the butt in the coming years. It's definitely been part of the urgency that you just talked about, but it has not been, I think, a very good outcome from the perspective of the interplay between elected officials, constituents, and just the overall political scene, at least in Miami Beach.
That sounds correct. There's one project, one street that was flooding, and its renovation got shut down by, let's say, very wealthy folks in their 70s. So from their perspective, is, you know, if I'm going to have to live for the next couple of years with all this noise of like rerunning pipes through the street, and then they're going to raise the street and the water's going to run into my yard where right now it stays in the street, that they're okay with that. And from that age perspective, I might be thinking the same thing. I don't have that money, but so it's the perspective of the people, and then, you know, but they're not going to be there in 10 years probably. And the city is exactly doing the right thing by raising the streets. My perspective is they need to be thinking about the private property owners and figuring out a way to kind of bring everybody along at the same time. And then I think we'll have less kind of confusion, and there's tons of misinformation out there about what's going on and how these pumps work, and are they, you know, there's folks that believe they're actually polluting the bay now because the water's being pumped out, and the science doesn't seem to support that. So the communication part is probably the biggest challenge.
I would add that for the work that we do, it can get quite complicated because we serve the entire county, which is inclusive of Miami Beach and the city of Miami. You know, the entire county is about 2.7 million people, and there are 34 different municipalities inside of Miami-Dade County. So that's a lot of city commissions, town commissions, plus the county itself, which is actually, unincorporated Miami-Dade County is actually the largest city, so to speak, in the county. So we are, you know, kind of constantly moving between the county, the city of Miami, some of the smaller cities like Homestead, which is the agricultural seat of the county, Sweetwater, which is one of the most, actually one of the most vulnerable, lowest lying cities in the county. And so the politics change drastically from city to city. You know, the city of Miami Beach has been really forward-thinking in the work that they're doing. The city of Miami, I would say, is right behind them and is doing a somewhat better job of resident outreach than Miami Beach has done. But there's still a lot to learn even between these cities. So for example, with the passage of the Miami Forever Bond, the City of Miami's commission decided to have an advisory committee, and they publicly stated that they were planning to appoint a number of different professionals that may or may not even live in the City of Miami to serve in this advisory capacity. The Miami Climate Alliance, which we're a part of, was very upset by this proclamation, and so we began to organize, and we showed up at several commission meetings, and we created a list of demands. First and foremost was that everyone on the advisory committee needed to be a resident of the city of Miami, that there needed to be both like socioeconomic differences, you know, equal representation on the advisory committee, and also it couldn't, you know, frankly, just be a bunch of, you know, wealthy Cubans or white people sitting on the panel. There needed to be ethnic diversity, racial diversity as well. And the City of Miami Commission accepted all of the demands. And fortunately, a couple of the graduates from our leadership program are now part of that advisory committee. So that was a huge win and a huge step. That was about 10 months ago. The advisory committee has not met yet. So there's still progress that needs to happen. The city is talking about rolling out different town halls to talk about how the bond money is going to be spent. They've had one meeting in the entire city of Miami, which is 700,000 people, and is not going to cut it. So there's a lot of outreach and community engagement that still needs to take place.
I had something I had to mention. I just thought of. There's also from the government level fear of showing the maps of sea level rise because they're too afraid of it causing disinvestment. So they don't want people to panic, freak out, and take their investments elsewhere. I don't know how that way. To me, it seems like let's get people flipped out, and then they'll come in and we'll figure out and get a solution. Because if we wait too long and bury our head in the sand, so to speak, the water's going to be here, and then we're messed up.
We definitely have some of that here in Louisiana as well, although our state agencies have shown the map in recent years quite a bit, and there is an awakening. The residents are quite involved. Industry continues to happily invest in certain areas, though, which is quite interesting.
Could I just mention one thing about that? So there's a global task force called the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, TCFD. It's led by Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, and Mark Carney, who's the head of the Bank of England. And essentially, it is a guideline that exists for the Financial Stability Board, which is like the SEC of Europe. And because it's part of essentially that big European advisory, it affects American companies. And what the task force says is that any investment needs to understand its physical risks from climate change. So real estate investment trusts are some of the first investors who are looking at their portfolio and saying, holy cow, I didn't need Miami to show me that map. Those maps are globally available. I can download them from anywhere, and I can see what those risks are. And so what's really fascinating about that is that there's anecdotal evidence, which will hopefully eventually bear itself out in some real research, just hopefully in terms of I don't want to be giving you just an anecdote. I wish I could give you a real data point, that real estate investors are choosing Miami Beach over Miami or Hollywood or some of the other communities in this arena because Miami Beach has been so in the lead on creating their adaptive capacity. So that also suggests that there will be winners and losers in Louisiana. We often speak about it in the state context, but you have communities that have moved ahead. And one other thing I should have said, but I was thinking about the communications. I think the View from the Coast and the LA Safe Project are global examples of great practice of communications, and that you should be very proud of the agency that you have built in individuals and communities feeling ownership for their futures, even as it does look very tough, through those really important, gritty, heartfelt, and innovative and creative solutions around communications.
Great. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to see if the audience had any questions. Looks like we have one right there. Do we have the microphone?
I think that we have sufficient amount of impacts that for folks that don't wish to get into the carbon argument, they are perfectly happy looking at solutions that's going to keep their streets dry. And that's the part that I think has been a wonderful transformation, is that what had previously been very, maybe I don't know if antagonistic is quite the right word, but camps on is it happening or not happening. It's just tough to deny when you're canoeing down your street. And so those very evident physical impacts have really led to an impetus to look at solutions and adaptation. Mitigation's a different conversation that is still highly debated. but at least for us that are trying to ensure that we have good mobility, clean water, the real basic needs that we need to provide to citizens, we're there in Miami.
And may I also just offer one other case? So Catalyst Miami, Gretchen's organization, along with some other advocacy organizations, were responsible for moving the government in Miami, so not Miami Beach, to pass the Miami Forever bond. And I think the story there is really interesting. The mayor of Miami at the time, whose name I don't even remember, he was elected on a climate-denying, no new taxes platform. Yeah. And then in his administration, under his watch, there is a new bond that is about mitigating climate risk. The bond itself also is incredible because it's also for affordable housing, so it has all these wonderful social equity elements to it too. And he was, by the way, transformed into a believer around climate science by his son. But in the meantime, what he did, I think, is really profound, or what maybe it wasn't he that did it. Let's give credit to the advocacy organizations. The government got out of the way, knowing that they couldn't own climate risk, since they had advocated for it not being true in their election campaign, and allowed for the people, who by and large very likely are more in the camp of understanding the science, to take the reins of this seemingly contentious, but in the end, obvious solution for the city.
Are you all resilient around the macro markets? Because you all suffered during the recession, right? Are you guys prepared for the next recession? You know, resiliency from man-made disasters.
Right. Well, I think the next big short, some of us believe, might be in the housing markets related to climate change. And the newest data from Climate Central and Willow, which is a private real estate internet purveyor that many of you know, came out, I think, just 3 days ago, and it pretty much says that our mortgage markets are heading in the wrong direction in terms of their security. So I definitely recommend the Climate Central information to you. It's obviously, and should mention, it's the national information that they parlayed into beautiful maps to show us risks we have.
Yeah, one of the differences we have now, specifically in our real estate market in Miami, is that we get a lot of foreign investment. And if there's a revolution somewhere in Latin America, those folks are here, or there in Miami. And what's different now than we had during the other housing bubble, is that a lot of the things have been bought cash. So I do think that we will end up with a dip. It's inevitable that we will have a dip, but there's a lot of, there's fewer mortgages. I mean, folks have literally, with the $1 million cap on reporting, they've bought everything $9.99, and it's all cash buyers coming in.
Right. Thank you all. So we are experiencing a slow death in communities where there's people are moving one town up, and it's making a diaspora of community, which is really challenging when you think about resettlement or a healthy next settlement. What does that look like? What is the migration patterns, the change looking like in Miami?
So something that we are seeing with all of the speculation that's happening in some of the higher elevation neighborhoods that are historically immigrant or African American, a lot of those families that are deciding to sell their homes to developers, or actually often they're not even developers, they're LLCs that are just holding onto the land for no particular use. They're not, it's not clear what they're going to do with the land. Those families have the cash, but there really isn't anywhere nearby that they can go that's affordable. So a lot of them are, some are leaving the area, but many of them are going to the southern part of the county. Homestead, Florida City, the Redlands, which is the agricultural part of the county, is more affordable. But unfortunately, it's very disconnected from many services, definitely disconnected from forms of public transportation and from the jobs, like from the heart of the county's economy. That's a very disturbing trend. And then when you couple that with the fact that that part of the county is also very climate vulnerable, they're already experiencing saltwater intrusion in some of the agricultural land, also some of the homes down there, the Deering Estate, for those that are familiar with the area, and storm surge. Like, this is the area that was completely devastated by Hurricane Andrew 20 plus years ago. So that's something that we're very concerned about, moving vulnerable populations to even more vulnerable parts of the county.
Yeah, Camille, unfortunately, I think that you all are going to need to lead the nation in understanding what happens when you do the diaspora, sit back and do nothing approach versus what happens when you do what I feel as though you're on the cusp of, which is actually plan for migration and plan for receiving communities. And I'll just give you one example. 3 weeks ago, the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Compact, which is a 10-year-old institution that has got all sorts of partners together, it's really an extraordinary entity, had their annual meeting, 10th annual meeting. And I said something about migration from this seat. And apparently, afterwards, at least 20 people came up to me and said that that word had never been spoken, ever. They just are not talking about it. And I think partly is because we don't see quite the dramatic migration that we've already experienced here in Louisiana. But I don't think that there are any lessons to be learned yet from that area, and I think you all are going to have to help us to figure it out, and for here and for elsewhere.
I would agree with that.
I see we've got two goalposts for adaptive design. We've got the high frequency, low magnitude impacts that you're seeing in South Florida. We've got the low frequency, high magnitude Katrinas in New Orleans, Harvey, Houston, Sandy in the Northeast. How different are those two endpoints in the process of adaptive design?
I think I find them less different in terms of the adaptive design and more different in terms of getting folks to actually act. So and what I mean by that is that when we start to only think in terms of catastrophic events, I find that the policymakers, the whatever it is, once that event is over and that urgency is gone, if you can't articulate the daily, the additional co-benefits that come with designing, being a lot smarter and having something that really becomes a community amenity, they're not that interested in, they're willing to roll the dice. And so once you can articulate that you're still working towards a much more, rigorous system, and these are the steps that you're taking along the way, so it's not just engineering, there may be different things that happen in the social structure that really give you, like Atlanta. Atlanta's a great example. They've got this park, Fourth Ward Park, and look it up. I can't talk enough about it. And it was a stormwater area that was they were under a consent decree, and they were going to just do regular, gray infrastructure, just pipe it out, put another pump station, clean, gone. What they did is they created this amazing stormwater park that is just an absolutely amazing transformation of the neighborhood, economic engine, and now serves as one of the anchors of the Greenway project that they're going to do, of the Greenbelt that they're designing. They've got another one, Nims Park, that's along the way, and there's a lot of historical context to it. But if had it been perceived only as an extreme event type of thing, or just for when the storms, that whole visioning piece wouldn't come in. And so I think being able to tuck those, those smaller things that come along and are a little bit more chronic and kind of less sexy to solve, along with the dramatic event, is where the magic really happens. So.
I saw one question over there. Yeah, go ahead.
My question is for Gretchen. I'm really fascinated by this sort of opportunity, perhaps, of these low-income people living in the higher elevation land. Is there some way that you can kind of turn that where, and I know this is very difficult and this is not my arena or anything like that, but if you can bring all those people together to act as one and say, we're not going to sell this, they're going to get expert advice from real estate people and lawyers or anything about how much they could demand for this land, with the caveat that there will be affordable housing for them within whatever development takes place. I mean, it's kind of a rare opportunity in a way for something like that to happen. And is there any thought going into that kind of effort?
Yeah, there's a lot of organizing that's underway in those communities, and not just by Catalyst Miami, but by other partner organizations like the New Florida Majority, the Clio Institute, FAM Miami, which is Haitian Women of Miami, and we're certainly doing our best. It's very difficult to organize such a large part of the community when there's very limited social justice infrastructure. And I don't know whether you all can relate to that, but in a city as large as ours, when you have like maybe 3 or 4 nonprofits that actually do community organizing, it's difficult to mount that massive of a campaign. But that said, some of the ideas that we're pursuing, we're doing in partnership with other sectors in hopes that will be more successful. So working with the business community, with the banks in particular, with academia on identifying land that is vacant and owned by either the county, the city, the schools, thinking of ways to convey that land to a land bank or to a community land trust, so that it can be used for permanently affordable housing. You know, in the case of a land trust, with a land bank, we might be able to be more flexible with how the land is used, can be used for different economic development purposes, or for green space, which is something that we need a lot more of. So these are some of the strategies that we're looking at. You know, this. I'll kind of conclude by tying it back to the earlier comments about local politics. Especially at the county level, there's a very close connection between the developers, the land use attorneys, and the county commission. You know, a couple of years ago, we tried to pass an inclusionary zoning measure, and it failed. We just could not get the votes. You know, the city of Miami is now considering something similar. You know, of course, there are voluntary inclusionary zoning policies in place, but nobody ever takes advantage of it. It's not always easy to have a policy environment that enables the kind of change that we want to see, where we can really preserve these neighborhoods for the people that settled these neighborhoods and have lived there for generations.
Okay, great. So thinking about, again, how the front line is the most advanced, responsible, and visible position of field or activity, what is the one activity that you wish you could or should or advise others to do to get to that resilience aspect, the way that you see resilience in the Miami area?
Someone else start first.
Well, for me, it's pretty simple. I think we can't wait for things to be perfect, and we're never going to have all the information that we need. We could, you know. And I'm a scientist, and I just love data, you know. But we're never going to have the amount of data that we need to make the exact perfect decision. And I think that places like this is where the magic happens. It's don't wait for things to be perfect, and keep exchanging those ideas, and we'll adapt. We're scrappy, we're smart, we're going to figure it out. But continuing to be really intellectually curious and move ahead. The killer is going to be when we wait for perfect. So
interesting. Wow, well, I'm going to take that one. You know, I've learned so much at this summit, so thank you all so much for sharing your wealth of information. One thing that I learned this morning was, so Better Block really rocked my world, because I had just read your Coastal Master Plan, which is an extraordinary document. Gosh, that is just so rich in gorgeous engineering, gorgeous science. And then here I am in Miami Beach. They have no master plan anything. Literally, they have been doing a Better Block Adaptive capacity. Really, that's what it is. It's like, okay, we're going to do pumps. How many pumps can we get out this year? We're going to do road elevations. How many can we get out this year? And so our final recommendation, I mean, we had many recommendations for things they needed to do better, but one of them was, and in my mind's eye, I had your coastal master plan. Where is your engineering optimization model that, like your coastal master plan, takes the 8 different things you can do with any piece of land and asks, are we actually using the right tool for this problem? Have we looked at the whole geomorphology? Do we understand what happened, 100 years ago and what's going to happen in 20 years? So I think that for me, one of the real lessons is that what we need to do is some mix between better block, like literally getting out there like renegades and doing it ourselves, or just as fast as you possibly can, like Miami Beach did, and doing a much more planful, bureaucratic, master plan, long-term view. And there is some incredible frisson between those two things, which is the success that Louisiana is going to bring to yourselves and the nation around your adaptive capacities, I'm sure.
I love that you just pointed out how Miami Beach doesn't have a master plan,
Yeah.
which is true of the city of Miami, Miami-Dade County, and every other city in the region. There is no comprehensive community development master plan. So you're definitely, Louisiana is a few steps ahead on that one. I'm not sure whether this is true for yours, but what I would hope for ours, if we get around to having one, is that there really would be meaningful resident engagement, and in particular in the communities that are going to be disproportionately impacted. I feel like the best way for a plan like that to really succeed is to make sure that community ownership is kind of baked in from the beginning, that residents are involved in the creation of the plan and the execution of it.
Real quick.
And my comment is that however the process goes, we should be trying to look at other people's perspectives, not just our own, and do it in a generous way, and be nice citizens with each other, and be truthful with the information that's available. It's the best way.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.